From the deeps, I rise. Yeah, you're in deep water. Slardar.
734 is well underway, and most people are still coming to grips with what heroes currently benefited the most from the recent changes that occurred when the patch dropped. This video is going to briefly go over none other than the Slithering Guardian himself, Slardar, and exactly how and why you can benefit from picking him up and practicing him, seeing as he receives some fantastic buffs with 734. If you like this type of content, I'd very much appreciate a thumbs up and a follow here on my YouTube channel. I put out educational content on a weekly basis that I hope you'll find useful. So what's the deal with Slardar then? For one thing, he's one hell of an aggressive hero when he's played right. And given how 734 really isn't a whole lot different in the metagame compared to 733, it's everything we could ask for in a hero to help us dominate a lane and proceed to take over a game. Slardar is in possession of some seriously good starting stats from the beginning of the game. With his close to 6 base armor, he's incredibly durable, boasts some wonderful HP regen, and generally has a lot of damage going for him early, even if we look aside from his active skills. The main thing we're going to focus on in this video, however, is how the recent changes in 734 has sent him a bit overboard into the powerful spectrum, which happens to be the slight rework of how Bash of the Deep now functions. The two changes in specific that occurred to Slardar directly were that of Slithering Crush having a better cast point, making landing stuns on lane that much easier in particular, with the puddle duration also slightly increased from it. This already was a very helpful buff to how Slardar applies pressure in the early game, but what really takes him a step further was the before mentioned Bash of the Deep change. Now, for every point in Bash of the Deep Slardar has skilled, he will subsequently get 10, 20, 30 or 40 damage as long as he finds himself present in water of any kind. This damage buff is absolutely monstrous in terms of numbers, effectively increasing Slardar's damage output by about 50% compared to before when he uses his newfound buff correctly. Because his crush also has extended puddle duration, what will now happen is that 7 seconds after Slardar now casts Slithering Crush, he will also do the associated level of Bash's damage on top of whatever damage he's already in possession of, not just added into the Bash itself, which is a huge game changer for him. While often seen as an offlane hero, this buff also makes him a complete menace on the mid lane, since he'll be in the water a lot of the time while he's laning there, and by level 3 can now be in possession of 20 plus damage at almost all times, making him one of the hardest hitting heroes in the entire roster at that level. Regardless of lane choice, it now becomes incredibly important to make the most of his ability to create puddles, since this is what seriously amps up his damage to a ridiculous level and makes you able to completely obliterate heroes in the early game. This newfound buff only becomes that much scarier as we enter the mid game, due to how the puddle mechanic functions around Slardar's ultimate. For the duration of the ultimate, enemies will be leaving behind a puddle wherever they walk. A puddle that now increases Slardar's damage output by 40 at level 4 with every hit, letting him absolutely beat everyone senseless compared to his prior version. As if that wasn't enough, because Bash gives you flat damage boosts instead of just a damage boost on the Bash itself, it means we can now intentionally use Slithering Crush to amp up our damage while we're pushing. That's right, by crushing as you're taking out a tower, you're adding a lovely 40 attack damage to every tower hit with Slardar for 7 seconds now. This buff is absolutely bonkers. And given how Slardar never was the best at taking down buildings before, this really lets him ramp up building damage stupidly fast now. Now that we understand why Slardar might be a bit wild in 734, what exactly would then be the best way of building him as a hero? The two main downsides that Slardar faces as a hero happen to be his mana being on the low side, and his speed only being 300 base movement speed, due to him having to rely on his slithering sprint, and how he's empowered from being in water, much like his base damage now. No matter what, you want to accumulate as many points in Bash of the Deep as quickly as you can, as this will seriously accelerate your damage on heroes and structures alike, letting you take some amazing trades with people in lane and in fights. I'd suggest getting a value point in his queue, but it is also possible to max Slithering Crush early, depending on how laning looks like. The added damage and slow is nothing to scoff at, especially due to it being physical, making enemies take more than pure damage from it once you reach level 6 and apply your ultimate before casting it. As for items, I believe Slardar is best served by being ramped up and played aggressively, but I do also believe you can go about him a bit more greedily. My preferred build of aggression happens to be to acquire an early wand, a bracer, treads and then build into armlet, before getting Blink Dagger and completely taking over the game with it. Proper use of armlet in conjunction with his newly received bash buff is absolutely nutty. And by revving your bash up to 3 before hitting people when you go on them with Blink Dagger, you'll see them get practically destroyed before they can even get to move. His shard is also particularly nasty, applying corrosive haste before every unit Slardar hits with his crush, making you less reliant on ulting them on top of boosting Slam's initial damage on everyone. The shard also has the added benefits of messing with invis heroes. If you do manage to land a Slam where there is an invis hero, such as either Clinks or Bounty, they will get hit and they will have Slardar's ultimate applied to them, making Slardar a particularly cunning invis hero counter too. It is also possible to build more defensive rather than an armlet, from something like a Vanguard, or to go for the more greedy play with the newly buffed Midas, that a lot of players are becoming very fond of. Last but not least, the last two recommended items are that of BKB and Aghanims, in any order depending on the game you find yourself in. Given how stupidly aggressive you can play Slardar, pairing him with a BKB lets you absolutely steamroll people, especially if they're not in possession of a spell that can deal with a BKB right-clicking hero such as Slardar. Aghanims happens to be amazing on him as well, giving him so many buffs while he's present in his puddles. A high amount of HP regen, a stupid amount of armor, and even a bucket load of status resistance, while also simultaneously increasing puddle duration to 25, which is just insane, on top of the radius extending to 600. This allows you to quite literally pre-puddle before you're pushing high ground with Slardar, reaping the new damage benefits from Bash, or even prep for high ground defend and truly become a slithering guardian by doing so. After these items, it's a bit of a free fall, and up to the individual players what they deem the best for the game at hand, with tankability, damage and utility all being viable options for Slardar, if you haven't won the game from the amazing power of Aghanims alone. It's incredible how much Slardar truly has been buffed primarily from the change to his Bash of the Deep, but here we are. I can't recommend the hero highly enough. He's superbly powerful coming into 734. He's a very strong and tanky laner now, on top of being absolutely dominant as he comes swinging into the game, especially from a laning phase that went well. He's rather easy to pick up initially as well, but understanding and getting used to all his small quirks about him will take some time. But once you're comfortable with Slardar, you're going to be able to wreak some serious havoc in your Dota 2 matches.